Screenwriting for Hollywood, Part 3. Okay, we're ready now to move to the third stage of the screenwriting process, and that is plot structure. Plot structure pertains to the events of a movie and their position relative to one another. What happens, and when does it happen? Those are structural issues. Proper structure means that the right thing happens at the right time to elicit maximum emotion. So that, when you ask yourself, should you have a car chase in your movie, and if you do, should it open the film, or occur halfway through, or be at the climax of the movie, those are all structural issues. Because, the things that happen in your story, and the way you position them, is going to either enhance the emotional experience of the reader, or it's going to dissipate. So again, your ultimate goal is to elicit emotion, and the sequence of events is going to contribute to that, as much as the story concept and the characters are. So, to approach structure, what I wanted to first of all, is give you the overall structure of any feature film. And then, I want to go into specific detail about the principles for scene-by-scene arrangement of your story. But first, to discuss the overall structure, I need to let you know that screenplays consist of 5 turning points, or screenplays are composed of 6 basic stages that will be divided by 5 turning points that will occur in any properly structured movie. Regardless of the length of the film, regardless of whether it's a thriller, or an action movie, or a romantic comedy, or a drama, all properly structured movies consist of 6 stages, separated by 5 turning points that occur at exactly the same moment in the film. Let's take as an example the movie Thelma and Louise. The first 10% of any properly structured film is what I call the setup. Now, the reason I'm talking in terms of percentages instead of minutes or pages is because movies vary in length from 90 minutes to 3 hours. Screenplays could vary from as brief as 95 pages all the way to 180 in some sort of an epic film. So, the first 10% of any properly structured movie is the setup. In the first 10% of Thelma and Louise, for example, we are introduced to a waitress in a dead-end job and a housewife in a dead-end marriage. That's the undeserved misfortune to create the identification. We immediately feel sorry for these 2 women, because obviously Louise is not going any place with her life right now, her relationship is kind of stagnant, her job she doesn't care about, she's just sort of stuck. And even more than that, Thelma is married to this schmuck, who, obviously runs around on her, but she's so scared of, she thinks she's got to get permission, just to go out of town for the weekend. So, for the first 10% of that movie, we're introduced to these 2 characters, the identification is established, and we learn what their everyday life is about before we are plunged into any new circumstances. The setup of your screenplay is sort of that point, or that period, where you say to the reader, this is who my hero was yesterday. This is how he was living his life before the story actually gets underway. And then, at the 10% moment of the film, 10% of the way into the script, the hero must encounter some new opportunities. And this first turning point means that at the 10% mark, something has to happen to your hero to create in your hero a desire. Earlier I made a big issue of the principle that the hero's outer motivation must be a desire with a clearly defined endpoint. This is not that. This is not a desire with a clear endpoint, but rather is a desire simply to be in some new situation. So, the second stage of your screenplay is going to involve some new place, either figuratively, or very often literally, that your hero is going to be. The second 15% of the script is the hero wanting to be, or deal with, or react to some new situation. In the case of Thelma and Louise it is clearly both, because the new opportunity is the opportunity to go out of town for the weekend. And, even though that opportunity is presented right from the very first line of dialogue, it is the moment when Louise comes to pick Thelma up and they leave town. That occurs at the 10% mark of the film. And now they are beginning this journey. It seems like it's going to be a simple journey, and their desire is just to be in some new situation. Instead of being in the lives they were living, now they want to be out of town on their way to Bob's cabin. That's all it is. But then, of course, bigger things lie ahead. Because at the 25% mark of the movie, which by the way, if you follow widely accepted 3-act story structure, is the end of Act 1. Because Act 1, in a 3-act structure, is the first 1/4 of the script. At the end of Act 1, exactly at the 25% mark of the movie, something must happen again to the hero, this time creating a change of plans. That new situation that the hero thought they were going to be in forever, or for just a pleasant easy period of time, has now been thrown out the window because some new event has occurred that forces the hero to change her plans. And the desire to be in a situation is transformed into a very specific desire with a clear visible endpoint. Because, in fact, it is exactly here that the hero's outer motivation must be established. And this is one of the most important structural principles you will learn here. And that is that the hero's outer motivation, which defines your story concept, must be established at the 1/4 mark of your script. At the end of Act 1. Not before. Because if you establish your story concept, or your hero's outer motivation, at the 10% mark, your movie will die somewhere around 70%. You cannot sustain an audience's emotional involvement in a single desire for an entire movie. Rather, you take the entire first 1/4 of the script just to introduce your hero, show what their life is like before some new opportunity occurs, and then put them in a new situation, building up to the moment when, at the 25% mark, the outer motivation will be established. So, for example, in Thelma and Louise, what happens exactly? 1/4 of the way through that movie, Harlan tries to rape her, and Louise shoots him. And that necessitates a change in plans, because now, they gotta forget about going to Bob's cabin. Now, they have to get out of town. And right after that, the outer motivation is announced by Louise, when she says, "You can do what you want, Thelma, but I'm going to Mexico. I'm gone." And that's what the movie's about. If I ask you to state, what is the story concept of Thelma and Louise, you would say, it's a two-equal hero story about a waitress and a housewife who want to escape to Mexico after one of them kills the guy who tried to rape the other. The visible endpoint of this movie is crossing the border to Mexico. This isn't about two women who are trying to find themselves, or trying to be independent, or trying to deal with the loss of their money, or deal with the fact that they kill somebody, although it is all of those things. But none of those things defines the story concept, because none defines a specific clear endpoint. The endpoint is getting to Mexico, so that's what the movie's about. It's a story about a waitress and housewife who want to escape to Mexico, and that is established exactly 1/4 of the way through this film. And then, that moves the heroes into the third stage of the movie. And for the next 25% of your film, your hero must make progress. So, stage 3 of a properly structured screenplay is progress. That means that, whatever plan hero has for accomplishing this goal and reaching this finish line, it seems to be working. The hero seems to be getting closer to the destination by following the plan she's devised. Their plan is to elude the police, who don't know yet that they're the ones who shot the guy, and get to Mexico before they're discovered. And so far their plan seems to be working. Now, it does not mean that there is no conflict. You could never conceivably have 25% of the screenplay without conflict, because, remember, conflict is the source of emotion in the screenplay. So, you can't go a whole half an hour in a 2-hour movie with no emotion. But the conflict is either avoided or overcome, for that next stage, for this third stage in the process. So, even though they have a great deal of conflict in this stage, in Thelma and Louise, they still seem to be getting to Mexico the way they hoped. But then, at exactly halfway through the movie, at the exact midpoint of the screenplay, just as with the midpoint of any journey, the hero must pass the point of no return. The point of no return is that moment in the screenplay, or that moment in the journey, where the traveler is closer to the destination than they are to the point of origin. In other words, the point of no return is a moment, at the exact midpoint of your screenplay, that says to the audience there's no turning back from this point on. The hero has put both feet in, and is so fully committed to achieving the goal, that they no longer have the option of going back and living the life that they were living during the setup. So, what happens at the exact midpoint of Thelma and Louise? Thelma robs the grocery store. Why is it the point of no return? It's the point of no return, because it thrusts the heroes into stage 4 of the screenplay, which is complications and higher stakes. Do things happen when your hero passes the point of no return? Number 1, it becomes much more difficult to accomplish the outer motivation. And, number 2, it becomes much more important to accomplish the outer motivation. It is tougher to get to the destination, but the stakes are higher, and there's more to lose if the hero fails. Now, why is robbing a grocery store that kind of event? Because, as Louise says when they're running away in the car, Thelma, there's such a thing as justifiable homicide, there's no such thing as justifiable grocery store stick-up. And so, now, things get tougher and tougher and tougher. And from this stage, the conflict starts to build, and the obstacles become greater and greater. And so, the cops are closing in, and they have to move faster, and they have run-ins with the truck drivers, and so on. Until, at the 3/4 mark the movie, which is by the way the end of Act 2, because in a 3-act structure, Act 2 is always the middle 50% of the film, at the end of Act 2 the hero must suffer a major setback. Something must happen at the end of Act 2 that makes it seems like all is lost. Like, no way are they going to achieve this goal. Or, another way to think of it is, the plan falls apart. Because remember, in stage 3 they were making progress, because they had a plan, and it seemed to be working. In stage 4 they continued the plan, although it was more complicated, and the stakes were higher, because of passing the point of no return. But the major setback is usually when the plan goes out the window. And what happens if the 3/4 mark, for example of Thelma and Louise, she's talking to Slocum, the Harvey Keitel character on the phone, and he says, "You know, Ms. Sawyer, I don't think you're going to make it to Mexico." In other words, that's when we learn, and they learned, that the cops know where they're going. And there's a line of dialogue that is the perfect embodiment of the major setback of a movie. And that's when Louise says, "Thelma, we only had 2 things going for us. Nobody knew where we were, and nobody knew where we were going. Now, one of the things we had going for us is gone." And the major setback in the movie is when the thing your hero thought she had going for her is gone. When the audience believes there's no way that this is going to happen now. No way they're ever going to be able to do this. The problem for the hero is though, they can't go back to where they were at the beginning. They've already long ago burned that bridge by crossing the point of no return. The plan is out the window. So the hero's all left with only one choice, and that is, in stage 5 of the script, they have to pick themselves up by their bootstraps and make one last, all or nothing, do or die, final push. This is that period in the screenplay when the hero must expand every ounce of energy he has in one last-ditch attempt to achieve this goal, or die trying. And of course the final push in Thelma and Louise is, it becomes a car chase. In other words, the cops know where they are, they know where they're going, all they can do is try to outrun them and get to Mexico before the feds catch them. And so things get tougher and tougher and tougher, move faster and faster and faster, until the hero reaches the final turning point of the movie, the 5th and last turning point, and that is, the climax of the film. The climax of the film is that scene where the hero faces the biggest obstacle of the entire movie. And it is also that scene where the hero's outer motivation is resolved once and for all, with no ambiguity. In other words, at the climax, the hero is presented with one last obstacle to overcome, and if she succeeds, she would have achieved the other motivation, and if she fails, she will fail. This is when we learn once and for all, with no confusion or ambiguity, whether the hero has won or lost, whether the hero has reached the destination or not. And of course, the climax of Thelma and Louise is the scene where they hit the Grand Canyon turnaround and then discover the cops are there, and there's no way they're going to escape to Mexico, they're surrounded. And it resolves once and for all that they are not going to achieve their goal. There can be no ambiguity about that. An audience can never be allowed to leave the theater wondering if the hero got what they wanted or not. As I said earlier, the climax is, usually very often, the final confrontation with the nemesis. As it is in Thelma and Louise, the final confrontation was Hal Slocum, who is their nemesis in the film. Now, you may notice, I did not identify a particular percentage point for this turning point like I did for the other 4. That is because this is the one turning point that can vary much more widely than the others as far as where it occurs in the screenplay. And it varies because where you put the climax in your script depends to a great deal on how much time you need to accomplish the final stage that follows. Because the 6th stage of the screenplay is the aftermath. The final stage of the screenplay is the necessary tapering off period of the emotion that needs to occur after the peak moment of the climax. In other words, you're not going to have a climax and then just cut to a black screen and credits. You've got to give the audience and the reader some opportunity to absorb and experience that emotion and come down from it a bit before you let them leave the theater or turn the last page or whatever. In addition, there are some other goals in the aftermath stage of the screenplay. One is exposition. If there is information the audience needs to explain how all this came about, then you're going to need to do it here. But there's also something else that needs to occur in the aftermath, and that is, you need to show the audience the new life that the hero is now going to live, having completed this journey. The reason that the turning point of the climax will vary, the percentage will vary for the climax however, is well illustrated by Thelma and Louise. Because if you think about those goals, the idea of creating a tapering off of the emotion, of explaining stuff, and showing the new life the characters will live, first of all, the author of this movie did not want a lot of tapering off. She wants to stun the audience with that ending. Next of all, it's not a complicated story that requires a lot of exposition. And last of all, and I hope after all this I'm not spoiling the movie for anybody when I say, I really don't think they make it to the other side of the Grand Canyon. So, there really is no life that they're going to be living now that we need to learn about, having completed the journey. I mean, I could be wrong, it's a freeze frame, so you never know, but I do think there's a reason you've never seen a sequel to this film. Okay? So, anywhere between 90 and 99% of the way through your screenplay is where you put the climax, depending on what the aftermath is going to be. And there's one final issue pertaining to where the climax of the film occurs. And that is, remember I said, if you have a romance character, so that the hero is pursuing that character, wants to win the love of their character, or get them into bed by the end of the film, and that means they have two outer motivations to follow. Just about any time you have a love story, Jerry Maguire, Lone Star, The English Patient, The Saint, they're all going to have a climax involving the nemesis character, or the basic outer motivation, the initial goal, and then a second climax resolving the love story. All the other percentages, all the other turning points occur at essentially exactly those percentages. Or another way to think of it is this. The further outside these percentages you go in your screenplay, the greater the risk you're taking. So, I can't say that your outer motivation might not be established at the 27% mark, but if you leave it till 40% of the way through, something isn't going to work because you're going too far away from the formula. Now, I've been talking about percentages because length of time can vary. In fact, this structure also holds true for an episode of a TV show. So, if you're writing a sitcom, you've got a 24-minute movie there, a 24-minute entity, and still the percentages will hold. But if you think about it, if you're writing a feature film, the percentages almost correspond to pages in your script. Because you want a screenplay that's 110 pages long, the formula being 1 page equals 1 minute. And since Hollywood wants movies that are going to be 90 minutes to 2 hours, 110 pages is ideal. There will usually be a few more pages than there are minutes on the screen. Okay. So, what good is all of this? Well, there are two reasons to give you this 6-stage structural outline. The first is that it is obviously an editing device. When you do a draft of your screenplay, you need to go back and see. Are the turning points there? Is there a point of no return? Is there a major setback? And so on. And equally important, do they occur at the proper time? But this can also serve as a good brainstorming device, because as with a lot of these checklists and terms and so on I'm giving you, if you know what needs to be accomplished, it'll stimulate your thinking to come up with something. Now, I want to move from this overall structure into a scene-by-scene checklist of structural principles and devices that you should use throughout the screenplay. Any properly structured movie is going to use all of these items, with the possible exception of one that I will point out when I get to it. And I divide these somewhat into your goal as a writer, so there are certain types of structural devices that I will discuss, certain categories of devices. And the first set of principles or devices has to do with just the overall plot of your movie. When you're figuring out the plot of the movie, here are the devices to consider. First, and perhaps most important, there can be no irrelevant scenes in the script. Every scene, event, and character must contribute to the hero's outer motivation. Now, I know you're getting sick of hearing the words outer motivation, outer motivation, outer motivation, but I am beating you over the head with it because it is so critical. No matter how funny or sexy or exciting the scene is, if it doesn't move the hero closer to the goal or create more obstacles to it, you got to get rid of it. Or you got to combine it with other scenes that will do that. Okay, the next structural principle applied to plotting is, the conflict in the story must build. The obstacles your hero faces must get bigger and bigger as the story moves forward. And next of all, the pace of the story must accelerate. That means, not only do the obstacles get bigger as the story progresses, they also occur more frequently as the story progresses. More conflict per minute, you might say, or more obstacles per hour. And next, there must be peaks and valleys to the emotional level of the story. Even though the obstacles are building at an accelerated pace, you must also understand that no single emotion can sustain for a long period of time. You must vary the emotional pitch of the story, so your story does not become monotonous. That's what monotonous means. Monotone, single pitch, a single emotional pitch. In other words, if you have something very exciting, then follow up with something more light or funny. Or, if you have something big and humorous, follow it with something more serious or tender. Any well-structured movie does that.